Good morning, everybody. This morning I'm going to talk to you about someone you probably never heard of, Captain Howard Levy. And to begin, I'd like to start with a quote from an article written about him. At 11 in the morning of a drizzly day in June, Captain Howard Brett Levy, MD, was seized and manacled, hurried from a barracks courtroom, and carried off in a staff car to the stockade at Fort Jackson. There he is confined under constant watch by an MP as he begins a sentence of 3 years at hard labor for crimes of conscience and belief. Howard Levy was an Army doctor during the Vietnam War. He was court-martialed in 1967 and found guilty on 3 accounts. Article 90, willfully disobeying a lawful order. Article 133, conduct unbecoming an officer. And Article 134, uttering statements with design to promote disloyalty and disaffection among the troops. He's depicted here as a disloyal American and a criminal, but I'm here to argue that it's not the case. Levy was court-martialed because he refused to provide training to Green Beret Special Forces aidmen in dermatology. He believed the Green Berets would use his medical training as a tool for political persuasion, which was against his medical ethics. At this time in his career, he also had developed an opposition to the war, and he had decided this was his breaking point where he could no longer participate, and he refused to train the Green Berets. He kicked them out of his clinic, and that was that. It wasn't until several weeks later that he was called into his commanding officer's office and questioned about the incident, where Levy denied nothing. He told him exactly what happened. He was perfectly aware of the consequences that would follow, but he stood his ground. He refused to train them. Several weeks later, he was court-martialed and sentenced to 3 years of hard labor in prison. So, before I go into deeper analysis of this story, I want to remind you of the time frame that this was set in. The 1960s saw some of the most aggressive racial conflict and racial inequality that America had seen since the Civil War era. There were constant demonstrations, riots, acts of violence. Martin Luther King had just begun his famous movement, and interracial marriage was even still banned in 16 states. It wouldn't be for a long time until the United States finally saw racial equality. So a little bit about Captain Levy. He was an Army captain and a physician, as I mentioned. He was from Brooklyn. He was a very educated man. He went to school at New York University and received his MD from the State University of New York Medical Center. He was a very high performer in school. He wasn't really interested in politics. He was the president of his fraternity, and he was spoken highly of by his professors. He wasn't considered a radical individual during his college years. He signed up towards the end of his completion of medical school for the Berry Plan, and what that is it's a program that allows physicians to be deferred from military service while they acquire medical training in civilian institutions in the specialty of their choice. This was offered to doctors in replacement of entering the draft because there was a serious shortfall of physicians during the Vietnam War. It was also known as the doctor draft law because no doctors ever refused it. Nobody ever wanted to take their chances in the draft. In return, they had a 2-year military obligation. After grad school, the 1960s started, and Levy found himself out of his academic bubble and in the real world. While completing his clinicals, he became very active in civil rights issues and the promotion of racial equality. Primarily, he was active in promoting African American voter registration, and he also helped to operate a free medical clinic when he wasn't on duty. This was not typical white Army officer behavior, and he eventually caught the attention of the Counterintelligence Corps, whose mission was to deter espionage and sabotage within the U.S. Army. He was placed under surveillance because of these off-duty activities and had acquired a secret dossier 180 pages long by the time that he was court-martialed. This dossier ended up playing a huge factor in his punishment. At the time of his act, Levy had 2 reasons that he didn't train these soldiers. The first one is that he believed this training was irrelevant. The program assigned Levy to provide 5 days of training to these soldiers in dermatology. He believed 5 days of instruction was irrelevant and was not sufficient to train someone sufficiently in a medical field. He simply thought there was no point, and he thought it would lead to more harm than good. He also believed strongly that medicine should not be used for political purposes. We're all familiar with the term winning hearts and minds, and Levy thought that this is how these soldiers were planning on doing it, using medicine, and he believed that that was very manipulative and against his medical ethics. In the Journal of Military Medical Ethics, the role of a physician-soldier is addressed, and it says that a physician-soldier is a moral impossibility. In a military duty, one must be a soldier first always, and a physician on the side. Levy's stance here is simply saying that he is a physician first before he is a soldier. Slide. I also think it's important to mention that this act was originally overlooked by his first commanding officer. After interviewing Levy about the incident, his commander decided that he wouldn't punish him. He would let it slide. It wasn't until his next commander took his position and re-looked into the situation. He was looking at Levy's personal file, and he had a flag on his file that said he was a security risk. Colonel Henry France was his commander, and he would later testify that this flag felt communistic to him. Also, intelligence began revealing Levy's secret dossier to his commander. It revealed things that Levy had leftist ideas and viewpoints, spoke favorably about those who burn their draft cards, saying it's their right, and that he is pro-Negro, and that he sides with Negroes when discussing civil rights matters. For these reasons, they told him that he should not be considered a loyal American. After discovering this, his commander formally ordered an official order to train the aidsmen, which Levy again refuted. The court-martial soon followed after that. Levy is not a great example of a military officer. His uniform was often sloppy, he had long hair, and he was occasionally a bit mouthy. His dossier also revealed he had made some comments to patients, such as that he would not serve in Vietnam if he was ordered to, and that if he was a Negro soldier, he would return home and fight for civil rights instead of in the war. He was wrong to make these comments because of his position, but they were mainly frowned upon because they were too progressive for him, for what they were used to, and that was considered very radical at the time. In conclusion, I think Levy was just born before his time. His activity in the civil rights movement was what magnified his punishment. And civil rights organizing is not a normal pastime for a white Army officer at the time, but his proactiveness in this matter is very noble in my opinion. In conclusion, Levy's stance, while punishable, showcased moral fortitude and courage. Unfortunately for Levy, the UCMJ doesn't make exceptions for physicians, but he stuck to his ethical beliefs and accepted the consequences, which speaks highly of his character in my opinion. Dr. Levy is not the villain that he is made out to be. Thanks for your time.